Eric,
Omar.
we're back in our private domiciles. And even though we are thousands of miles apart, it feels like we never left.
It feels like we're still in that hotel, California, or should I say Dublin. Harding Hotel shout out. It was an emotionally weighty time that we spent in Ireland and in the UK. We had connection to history. We had the hype of a huge historic event. And we had the hype train himself, Jay, with us, as well as the rock star of physical culture history, Connor. So to now be sitting in my jammies in the living room with you, it's it doesn't feel real that this is real, because it feels like that was real.
I understand exactly what you're going to say. When you said the hype, I thought you were going to reference said locomotive, the train that is Hype Train. We're still coming off of that high, but it almost feels like it's the dawn of a new chapter here, because we had that shared, experience, the Fellowship of the Stone. We got to lift together a little bit when we meet up again. You're going to be shreddy shred. I mean, if we're going to do what, Eric, are we both going to do it in what, it'd be July, August, the bod pod? Will we do that? I do plan on getting a little leaner, but are we going to do together, you think?
Well, I tell you what, for those who remember, Dr. Grant Tinsley was on the podcast talking all about the ins and outs of body composition. He's out there in Texas Tech.
Yep.
And there's a lot of other cool things in Texas, and that is the next planned Iron Culture documentary trip, folks, where we're going to be not only going back to Texas in Austin, where you recently were for Rascal-related business, but we're going to be there for the Stark Center, the largest museum of physical culture history at the University of Texas at Austin. We're going to be going out to Texas Tech, where Grant Tinsley is, and we're going to learn everything about body composition. And yes, you and I, 4-compartment models, we're going to see just how do you mess with the brain of a contest prep bodybuilder who thinks they're on track, and then you get a measurement of something that does not matter, won't be judged on stage, and you'll see me have an emotional breakdown on camera. It'll be the poignant moment of neuroticism that we all need to understand the sport better. And then there's a lot of amazing gyms out in Texas. Let me just say that, Omar. We're still working out which ones we want to go to, but there's a lot of history and there's a lot of culture there in kind of the contemporary era. So we'll nail that down. But at the very least, we've got 2 really big aspects that we want to do. And guess who's going to meet us out there? None other. Dr. Connor Heffernan, the official, unofficial, equal to us, but one road down. We're slightly more equal, I think is the term. Is that right, Omar?
Yeah. All animals are equal. Some are just more equal than others.
Correct. And that describes us compared to Dr. Connor Heffernan. All 3 equal co-hosts. We're official. He's unofficial. We're more equal. He's less equal. But besides that, exactly the same at the top of the pyramid, -1 rung for Connor. So we're going to have the reunion of the hosts. And we're going to get another series of lightning fast filming days where we don't sleep, but we get the work done, and we love it.
Eric, we're like, what is it? Would it be an isosceles triangle where 2 sides are equal lengths? I could be wrong here. And then one is just a different length, but nonetheless, it forms a triangle. I could be actually.
You keep talking. Let me look up isosceles because I can't remember.
Thank you. Yeah, just let us know. But also, interesting enough, while I do bring up triangles, Eric, he's perched atop an obelisk, and we already established that, and that's in reference to the lifting culture, us revering it, and that was for me in particular, and for yourself as well, a powerful episode because we participated in the culture, and I think. Again, once we release the Iron Culture documentary, and there'll be various parts, and folks, don't worry, we'll be keeping you abreast of all those things. Their conversation that was had between 2 Irishmen about the history, the culture, the relevance, we couldn't even replicate it when you and myself were trying to riff about it. But that's what lifting is all about. And that's why we talk about lifting. It's for everyone. It's for all people. And we talk about history, science, culture. So it's cool now to bring it back down to a topic that is timely topical for everyone. We're going to be talking about like coaching, a bunch of other things. But before I do, Eric, can I just read like 2 or 3 comments before we delve into the topic today? And do you want to correct me about the triangle?
No, I don't want to correct you. I want to say that you can definitely read whatever you want because you clearly got an A plus in junior high school geometry, because that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. At one point in my life, I did okay in school. That's about 20 years removed, So I'm like, hey, um, I will say that the top comment, this is the one I wanted to read, Eric. Sid said, insane talent to fit 3 hunky men in one camera shot. I'd train.
That's what's up.
hmm and then a question I had, a personal question.
Actually, I should say facts.
Facts. Big facts.
Big facts.
Yeah, we're making shapes. Got all the bits. Um, Chuck Buck wants to know this, and this is a personal question, Eric, but I've wondered this. Jessica's celebrations are the best thing I've ever seen. That's not the question. My question for you is, when you have literally 180 pounds of raw muscle barreling towards you, post now a victory celebration and just jumping towards you. That's like a fullback coming at you at full speed. And Eric, of course, you got to look like ready, and you can't seem too prepared because then it'll seem off the optics to the audience, where you're clearly ready because this unit's about to like barrel into you. So you kind of have to be like squared up and not super prepared looking, which obviously affects your ability to absorb such force. But I'm wondering what goes on in your mind when you like, are you almost terrified when she makes a lift to think, "Oh shit, now I gotta like catch this. I hope I don't break anything." What is your thought process? Can you just give that coach's perspective?
That's the thing about concussions is you have trouble remembering what was going through your mind at the time. And this is real, by the way, that when you are coaching for an athlete at an international competition who is a CPU, a Canadian Powerlifting Union athlete, you have to apply to be a coach. So I applied, and I had the joke, with the Canadian quote unquote accent about being the head coach at Sheffield, but that was real. And part of that process was making sure that I had taken, or I had the equivalent of, the required courses for sports coaches in Canada. And one of them is, I think, a course titled, and it's just an online course. It's nothing like I had to do a semester of college or anything like that, but it's Making Headway in Sport, if I recall the title correctly. And it's specifically about identifying concussions and managing them. And I was like, this is powerlifting. Why would I need to learn about this? But fine, I'll show you on my transcripts where I took, a sports medicine class. And then here we are. And now I understand why it's so important when you're coaching Jessica Bidner to understand about how to identify concussions. It's not for the athlete, it's for you when they truck your ass and go back to the warm-up room and then grab your ankle and pull you off stage because they just knocked you out. And they need you to be awake enough to call the next attempt change. So, yeah, I don't remember much, but I remember she was hyped and I was unconscious briefly.
Eric, what a perfect actual segue to the topic today, because we witnessed at Sheffield the very highest level of coaching done by a wide variety of different coaches with, different approaches. You released recently for Mass monthly application in strength sports. Everyone check it out. Kai will link it. Shout out to Kai in the description. It's a video, actually. It's about 45 minutes, and there's a PDF accompanying slide that says it's titled Real World Client Centered Coaching. And recently there's been a buzz, Eric, where we hear about the whole concept of evidence-based fitness, evidence-based practitioners. And then under this moniker also comes up the topic of evidence-based coaching. And usually it's people that are well-intentioned that aim to give possibly to help facilitate the best possible results with their clients and have a relationship and a dynamic that is able to bring about said performance and what the goals are and to help them meet it. Cool, whatever. But usually when you see the checklist, it's almost like, you're checking a car engine, you're checking the various things. It's okay, we got to take a look at the training. We have to take a look at the nutrition, maybe a little bit of sports psychology thrown in because we understand this is a 3D human that we're dealing with at all times. And you have to take an individualized approach, so on and so forth. And those are kind of all lumped together. And they understand that the counterexample is what we spoke about before, kind of the guru style, where it's top down, it's a hierarchy, like it actually is, where whatever they say, they're infallible. Whatever they say, it goes. There's no communication whatsoever. So it's not this rapport that one develops, like you have jokingly, like we said with Jessica. So they understand that. But in terms of the checks that go into what makes a good coach, as far as some people are concerned, it seems like it has a few things emphasized, but it seems like potentially, especially after I listened to this 45-minute video where you really highlight a lot of different facets. And I think this is going to be instructive because I think some people de-emphasize the role of a coach, or what are the different skill components within being a coach. You clearly have been a coach for over it's like now 15 years. You do a fantastic job. This is a topic you've thought about, and I think you've been at the forefront, and I've seen how your approach has influenced other people. I won't name them, but there's been other coaching companies, and I see like it actually, I'll say, Eric, a very quick aside. It was cool. I won't name specific names, so you could use the examples if you want then. Of like former either students or people that were in your sphere of influence when we went to Worlds, whereas like they're also now coaching. They also have their own approach, and you really do see it. It's been an evolution, is what I'm saying, certainly over the last decade. But it seems like there is this name that then is associated evidence-based coaching. We got it in the bag. Here are the constituent parts. Check, 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 and away we go. We could do whatever we want. And what I found from listening to the video and going over kind of the PDF outline, it's actually even more. There are more components than one would assume from what they see online, other people talking about.
Yeah, no, I like how you teed that up, and yeah, I was reflecting on it. I've almost been a personal trainer for 20 years, or trainer or a coach of some type. So I started personal training as a profession in '05, and that lasted till around 2011, and then I became basically a full-time sports coach, is the way I see it, for bodybuilding and powerlifting. And then sometime around 2015, 2016, I moved into being a part-time sports coach, as I took on all the other lovely things I get to do with certain people who I look at across thousands of miles, but I feel a deep connection, like we're right next to each other. And yeah, so this is something that I've been writing about, thinking about, and talking about on podcasts for, I would say, the better part of a decade, but it's even been an evolution in myself. I think the disconnect between being evidence-based from kind of like a scientific perspective of the methods of training people and taking an evidence-based approach to coaching, like what is the best evidence we have for coaching? And you have to ask the question, well, what is coaching? And coaching is about helping athletes find a motivation to perform at their best. So we have to think, okay, well, what is human motivation? What is performance? And what is the athlete's role? What's the coach's role in facilitating that in an athlete? And I think instead, the way it's looked at most of the time in evidence-based circles is a coach is a job title. And the thing that coaches do is they write an athlete's training, sometimes their nutrition, and then we want to make sure that's evidence-based. And so it focuses heavily on the quantitative science of exercise and sports nutrition, right? And I think that's great, and that's a really important step in the right direction, but it's not the same thing as coaching. And ironically, a lot of people in the evidence-based space are just wholly unaware of the fields of like coaching theory and human motivation. We're getting a little better with like sports psychology, but that's not exactly the same thing. And coaches who kind of see that as, that's the realm of a sports psychologist, are to some degree missing out on their role, I would say. So we'll rewind all the way back to '07, the first time I kind of really had this shown to me. Is I'd been working as a personal trainer for a couple years, and I was not great still at this point. It might have been '08. But I was moving more and more towards what I'll describe and what I'll explain as a client-centered or an athlete-centered coach. Just out of trial and error and just my own understanding of what I think is like emotionally intelligent and effective, really, when it comes down to it. And there was a hire of a new trainer in our personal training studio. And he was actually the valedictorian at UC Davis, which is a pretty damn good school in Northern California, getting his degree in exercise biology. And I was in like the first couple of years of my studies. So I was, it wouldn't be till 2010 or 2009. I can't remember when I finished my bachelor's. So I saw this person as someone ahead of me in where I wanted to be in my career. Yeah, what ended up happening is, because I'd already been working as a trainer for 3 or 4 years at this point, was I had to mentor him to help him figure out how to work with people, because that's not what you learn in a exercise science or exercise biology degree in this case, or at least it wasn't at that time in the mid 2000s. I've seen this topic of coaching psychology get added more and more to curriculums, especially when they're focused on putting people in the workforce. But nonetheless, I became very aware of this disconnect between the science of exercise and the practice of working with people and helping them achieve their goals through exercise. And that's a big challenge for most like fitness nerds who get into training, is they start really interested in optimizing variables, getting adaptations, loving training theory, loving nutrition theory, the biology, the biochemistry, the physiology. That's all super, super cool. But then they find that they don't get to use it because when they tell people to do what's optimal without context, they rarely are able to adhere to it, follow it, or that's not enjoyable, they drop out, etc. And this is something that I think most trainers face, and they start, knowledgeable but not good at training, and they get better over time. And that was kind of my first inclination that perhaps I needed to focus on a more broader skill set, right? So since then, I've thought more and more about this, and as I've actually gone into a sports science education, and I did an undergraduate degree that was sports management with a concentration in fitness and wellness. It included some of this stuff, and over time, I've thought about it. And also Jeff Alberts, I don't think he is someone who was super aware of this academic topic, but he was someone who was taking lessons from other prominent coaches in other fields. And so, for example, Jeff is a big fan of John Wooden, legendary UCLA basketball coach. I think he still has the records for the largest win streak, and had something, and at least tied for the record of I want to say in his tenure, like something like 70 or 80% of the years they won a national title. But the interesting thing about John Wooden and other coaches like him who are that prolific with their resume is they have a coaching philosophy. It's not just I stay up to date with the science and I do these things, but I have a perspective on what I'm doing. And John Wooden has a very in-depth philosophy. You can find his pyramid of leadership, and he has all these different character traits and qualities. He has like the 12 lessons on leaderships. He has books and books and books of this stuff. And I think he's a great example because he has a guiding light of the way he acts in different situations based upon a philosophy of how I help people. And if I was to really try to kind of be succinct about it, is that he helps people become the best version of themselves as a human, and then he believes that will lead to better performance. So I think there's a lot of coaches out there who don't even know that they should have a coaching philosophy. And then the next step from there is, okay, well, if we want to have a coaching philosophy, what is that and what do we base it on? And ultimately, if we're talking about sports coaches, it's the question of like, well, how do people do hard things, right? And then where can I be as a coach to facilitate that athlete doing those hard things? And yes, to some degree, like not having a terrible diet or terrible training plan is part of that. But that is not, if you just look at anecdotally, like successful athletes, plenty of them don't follow an evidence-based approach, right? And even when we just look at elite athletes, so kind of the you must be this tall to get on this ride as elite genetics, right? So once we got everybody with elite genetics, it is still not those who follow the evidence-based approach that discriminates between champions and non-champions. It really does seem come down to their mentality, their ability to really squeeze all the blood out of the stone for themselves. And that's something that coaches believe, and that's also something that athletes believe. And it's not that an evidence-based approach is not important. It is, and I think it does go into the equation. But I think if we're being truly honest about what our observations tell us, probably the most important factor out of those that have been discussed thus far, if we assume, similar genetics or sufficient genetics to be a world champion, is the ability to do the hardest thing you can, to push yourself to your limit, and to really kind of fill your cup. And good coaches know that they play a role in helping athletes do that. So to really help an athlete do that, you have to understand, how do they do that? Why do they do that? And how can I be a facilitator for that? And what that means is that your entire philosophical perspective is the athlete where the keys are. So being athlete-centered or client-centered is a specific thing, and there's a number of different ways to describe it in the literature, but it is a philosophical stance, and it is a way of operating as a coach that once you recognize it, and if you incorporate that into your coaching philosophy, it makes certain statements, perspectives, things that might otherwise bother you, typical industry challenges, marketing decisions, um, communication styles, all of them become much more clear as to which pathway would I probably choose. And I think one thing, as after I kind of help define what athlete-centered coaching is, I think it'd be really helpful to go through some examples of where people, quote unquote, go wrong. And I think there are well-intentioned coaches who probably are athlete-centered in many ways sometimes, but because there's a certain industry standard and they aren't like consciously aware of what it is to be an athlete-centered coach, even though they mostly embody it, they make errors in this way and do things that might be counter to a philosophy if they were to actually articulate and develop that philosophy.
Kai, timestamp this. It's a monster episode. I want to see that on the timestamp. Okay, it's official. We'll always try and distinguish now at what point it was. We've been talking now for 74 minutes, Eric. Brandon flashes on the screen. Guns, whatever, I will say, just going off, I will say, Eric, that it's weird that you mentioned that because that's one perspective, of course. There was someone in the PDF, the E-Shred, someone that won the River City Royal Rumble Classic. This seems to have in the PDF, if you're a mass subscriber, check it out. That's a little bit of a divergent view. But there's a few things, Eric, I do want to highlight before we get into that about well-intentioned coaches. I do want to ask you, because yes or no questions are always the best. A binary question. You started first and we brought this up before, as a personal trainer, in-person personal trainer. I would say that lifting in general is one of those rare pursuits that now in 2023, majority of people getting coaches, it's remote coaching. So there is a delay in feedback. People can give measured responses. So you give an assessment of form or whatnot, and you don't get that instantaneous human interaction of reading their body cues and so on and so forth. Anyways, what you said resonated with me at the very start. Just about the person that had the degree. So on the surface, ostensibly, this person has a little bit more education, but like actually in terms of the quite frankly more crucial aspects, the soft people skills, you were the person that had to help him along on his path. So yes or no, Eric, before we go on, do you think that you having some prior in-person personal training experience helped inform how you approach clients in general from some of your a natural human inclinations we all have of how we think things would be best? Do you think that informed your overall approach?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Eric, I'm going to let you go on that because I would 100% agree with that too. That my error that I made when I became way back in the day, just because I made a lot of sales, the personal training director of this gym, I would look first at someone's education level because I was like, oh, this person has a bachelor, this person has a master's in exercise. Are you kidding me? And there was one person, Eric, you'd find this funny. This person, it was about 15 years too early from the movement optimization kind of wave. This person was very like by the book, biomechanics, like all that stuff sound. But when I say some of the worst soft people skills I've ever seen, they took someone. So you take someone on the training floor, a prospective client, walk them through a session. I don't know. I forget what it was like. I guess it looked like a Bayesian curl now. And the person he was trying to instruct the person, how to perform it. And every time the person did it, not to his satisfaction, he would get like irate at the person. And I was thinking about, and he was thinking, well, in his head, Eric, obviously, if you just do it correctly, like you get better results. But the inability to communicate that, it was that moment where from where I was looking for, people, potential personal trainers, I'm like, I need to recalibrate this. This is all wrong. But that is a little bit of a tangent though, because we're going to get into the whole conversation where you said some of these different components of what makes a good coach or where people err and when they go wrong. Do you want to then, Eric, leap off onto that topic next, like where you said that well-intentioned coaches that might be aware of some of these things, but where are some of maybe the subtle ways that their path diverges that then leads to some of these differences in outcomes or in their approach?
Absolutely. And I think that was actually a really good subtle example you just gave, is someone isn't performing the exercise the way you taught them and you express your frustration to them. That is, whether you realize it or not, saying what matters here is how I feel about your form, right? It's not going, you've come to me as a client with certain goals. We've, sat down, collaborated, and figured out that this Bayesian curl is the best approach to it. Oh, you're not able to do it. Let me ask you, how did that feel? Are you even aware that you didn't perform it the way that I taught you? And if they're not, okay, well, I want you to see what I'm seeing. Let's take you in front of a mirror. Do you see this? Do you see that? What does it feel like? So it's the gatekeeper there, or the lens through which the whole thing is viewed in that interaction, is through the trainer, not through the client, right? And that is something like it doesn't seem like that bad to be like, look, I showed you how to do this. I'm frustrated that you're not able to do it. I do want to help you, but I'm trying and it's not working. But I think when you become a much more athlete-centered or client-centered coach, you're able to shift into a different way of being and operating that all aligns with a type of stance that you take. And I think until you really identify it, you can have these kind of divergent signals that sometimes don't elicit the type of response that you want that ultimately leads in what you're trying to do is help the person achieve their goals. Let me be really clear here. I am not perfect. I remember even later into my personal training career, I was working with a older teenager and their sibling and a parent, and that person was pretty high in body fat, overweight, and the parent and the brother were in much better shape, seemed to enjoy working out, and I trained them as a group. And the dynamic was such that the overweight sibling was clearly not enjoying training, but he was doing because he thought he should. He had to. He did want to lose weight, but I never really engaged him in how did you find yourself here? How do you feel about it? Is this pressure from your family? Is this an obligation? And the dynamic we got into was like, okay, we'll weigh you on a regular basis. And again, this is a teenager. So, I look back on this whole thing and I would have done all of it differently and I feel bad. But it was very much like, all right, well, if here's the nutrition plan that I want you guys to follow, here are the choices. And if you go off, well, we got to exercise more. So it was almost punitive, and it wasn't about like, well, what do you like, what works, and what's the barrier? There was some of that, but I think I look back and the amount of mixed messages I was giving, because I wasn't really aware of where do I fit into this equation of the client's motivation and success. It must have been very frustrating, and I think this is a really useful tool. This isn't, I don't want to like batter anybody over the head and be like, you're a bad coach, you don't even know what being a good coach is. But I think once you do get an understanding of human motivation and where you can really play an important role, it's actually quite freeing and empowering, and it makes decisions easier as a coach. So I'll lead with that because I don't want to sound too preachy or too self-righteous. This is something that's been an evolution for me and something I continually try to get better at. And I still mess it up sometimes because you do get emotionally invested in your client's goals. You do want to see them do the best. You might sit down and collaborate and set a plan, and then the person doesn't stick to it. And I think it's only human to be frustrated about that. But how you communicate that and how you frame it in your own mind is in your control. And I think, that's really what it comes down to. So I was mentioning earlier that if we want to understand what a good coaching philosophy should be, we have to understand the role of the coach and the importance of the coach and the fact that ultimately, how do people do hard things? If a coach can understand that, they can facilitate that. And our best understanding of how people do hard things is our understanding of self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is basically what creates human motivation, because there's no reason to decide you want to lift more weight than anybody else, right? You have to figure out what is the motive. So motivation is not, a group exercise instructor going, go, 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 go. That's great. But when I say a motivation, I mean like the motive for someone to do something. What is your why? And then what fulfills you once you do that? And in psychology and in basically any science that surrounds the understanding of why people do what they do or how they do what they do, it is more challenging to quantitatively measure this. It's not like, hey, I want to see who can run faster. Here's a radar gun and you both sprint. Okay. And we're going to compare those values. Which one is a lower value? You got there first, period, right? You have to first craft a theory and then you have to test it. You have to kind of stress test it. So you go, all right, if self-determination theory is understanding human motivation, how do we measure the construct of self-determination theory? What are the components? And then we have to validate like questionnaires and interviews to determine, okay, so people have these traits, and then do those traits correlate with or predict success? So that's kind of the way it works in sociology and psychology. So self-determination theory, we've talked about it before in Iron Culture, but to give a high-level overview, it basically posits there's 3 components to human motivation, and they are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. To put it in simple terms, autonomy is just that you feel like you're in charge of your life. You're the one who makes decisions for where you want to go. And when we see autonomy threatened in any facet of life, people get unhappy, they get depressed. I mean, think about being in prison, or think about being in an abusive relationship, or think about being in a politically oppressed or suppressed society, right? So autonomy is important. It's like that you are on your own path, and it is your path, not something that your parents put you on, or that a coach forced you upon, or that society has forced you down a narrow road, etc. Competence. This is not necessarily how competent you are, but just the fact that you feel you can improve it over time. That whatever you're doing, whatever path you're on with autonomy, it's something that you can improve at and get better at. You can demonstrate an improvement in skill. You feel that progression. And this is something that gets leveraged all the time in video games and social media, and we've talked about it. And the reason why people get bit by the iron bug is you can add kilos to the bar. You feel yourself getting more coordinated, and this applies to many things in life, any skill. And then finally, relatedness. And this is just that you are understood. You don't even necessarily need to be an extrovert, but just that there are other people out there who get it, and that you can use this thing that you're doing to relate to other people. That you have a sense of potentially community, even if you're not really a community-oriented person. But even in individual sports, for example, being understood and recognized, acknowledged, and having people be witness to your experience seems to be an essential component of the human experience. And the cool thing about the research on self-determination theory is that it holds true across multiple different societies. So the understanding of psychology and the way that humans operate, it often does need to account for the fact that someone who was born in a westernized country, or I should say a European country, or someone who was born in, say, like a Polynesian country or an Asian country or an African country, they might see the world very differently because the society might have different underlying intrinsic values. But these seem to be even before that. So when you look at correcting for more, say, individualistic societies or more communitarian societies, self-determination theory seems to hold true. This is our best guess at a theory that explains human motivation at a very essential level, which is kind of neat. So then the question is, all right, how does this relate to exercise? And we've got good data on that. So there's a great systematic review that was published in 2012 by Teixeira and colleagues titled Exercise, Physical Activity, and Self-Determination Theory, a Systematic Review. And they found that overall, the literature provides good evidence for the value of self-determination theory in understanding exercise behavior, and it demonstrates the importance of autonomous intrinsic motivation for fostering physical activity. So if you want to understand why someone is or is not participating in physical activity, it probably has to do with whether those needs are being satisfied from self-determination theory. So then in my mind, the next step is, okay, so what can a coach do to help foster those things? And coming back to motivation, I mentioned that intrinsic motivation is important. And we've talked about motivation before on Iron Culture. And again, it is not that exercise science, or sorry, that group X instructor is yelling at you, or you watching, a Ronnie Coleman video, although it is very motivating, lightweight baby. I will say that motivation is something that operates all the time. And it goes all the way from amotivation, just having no desire or thought about to do something. You have no reason to do it, all the way to the other side of the spectrum for what seems to be most consistently related with engaging in exercise, physical activity, etc. And that's intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation looks different for everybody. Intrinsic motivation means that you have an internalized why. And Omar, I don't know about you, but when we interviewed the 7 athletes that we did at the Sheffield, they all had very clear and very high levels of intrinsic motivation. And they all differed, whether it was related to being strong for their family, whether it was related to showing themselves and showing other people that they could be the best, whether it was related to fulfilling their own potential, or whether it was related to being present in the moment and enjoying the process of training. And they also stacked a lot of different motivators on top of that. So, for example, I think Jesus Olivares, who you did a great video on recently on your YouTube, when we interviewed him, he had a list of like 5 or 6 things he was trying to do, potential goals for the competition: deadlift world record, total world record, break the untested world record as well, see if he could get over a 600 dots, win the Sheffield, which also was kind of like beating Taylor Atwood, who was seen as like kind of the GOAT at the time. And yeah, so he had like a list of 6 things, and I think he accomplished 4 or 5 of them. And those are all extrinsic motivators. And those are not as powerful as intrinsic motivation, but they can be used in concert. So for example, getting paid to go lift, an extrinsic motivator. And one of the things that I noticed across everyone we interviewed, and actually everyone I've heard who we didn't interview, is that, yeah, the money was nice, but that wasn't what I was there for. And maybe that changes if we're talking like basketball money or something like that. But at least for, powerlifting money, it didn't subvert that intrinsic motivation. So there are many forms of extrinsic motivation. It can be, integrated into this whole concept. It's not bad. It just doesn't seem to have that same staying power of motivating someone when they have an identified belief about what it means to participate in this activity. So that means as coaches, we have to understand what are the intrinsic motivators of our clients, which means we have to really have some open dialogue with them. We have to understand them better. And that spectrum of motivational quality is lined up and supported by the research on self-determination theory. That autonomy component, when we see people expressing greater degrees of intrinsic motivation, they are more likely to fulfill the other aspects of self-determination theory, and they're more likely to participate in physical activity. So I would say the theory is pretty well supported, and then that is what each coach needs to understand. That is, how do people do hard things? By leveraging self-determination theory, and that resulting in having intrinsic motivation. And then the question is, okay, so what is our role?
Eric, these guns, they just keep firing, because I think this will be applicable not only to people that aspire to be coaches or to be better coaches, but even people, first off, to understand themselves and why they pursue the things that they pursue in the first place. Side note, I don't think Jess would have any problem with me mentioning this on the podcast, but she mentioned that about, and I'm sure obviously you guys had that conversation, that she said for her final deadlift that if it was to win, it was on the line. Let's say it's at Malta, and she had to pull the same amount of weight, she would feel 100% more motivated than the cash prize. And to your point, that's why Eric, one, this is a tangent, but it is, I think, a potent question to kind of frame to you, where you said motivation, different motivational pathways kind of like stack or they integrate and so on and so forth. Examining sometimes when you first interview a potential like prospective client and so on and so forth, and you see like you would say what would be, I guess, the correct term, like some ways like their psychology that's facilitated towards their goals, or some aspects of themselves that might be almost harmful to their personal identity or themselves as a character, but allow themselves to perform at a higher level. So it's like, let's say a deep rooted either insecurity or feeling of doubt, or basically a place that in the present, it's allowing them to operate at the highest level. But when you said for a coach and like the function of the coach, it's not only to bring about their best possible performance, but what you said with the coach, the
John Wooden.
John Wooden, exactly. We said bring about their highest selves. And I'm wondering, I know I'm way skipping ahead, but you just explain self-determination theory. Like how would a coach wrestle with that? Because I would assume, and this is now
Great question.
I'm making a characterization of, let's say, like bodybuilding and whatnot, but I would assume like every human being, man, depending upon where they are in their journey, they have good aspects that they're channeling in order to get their goals, and sometimes potentially harmful ones. So how do you approach that, Eric, with a prospective client where you see maybe the thing that they're really utilizing is allowing them to get there, but ultimately as a coach, if this is a 2, 3, 5, 10-year plan, that they would be much better just as a human being if they're to find something else, even if it's at maybe the expense of their ultimate high end of their performance. How do you do with all those things? I know, big tangent, but I know you've coached a lot of people through a lot of different things.
No, that's a fantastic tangent, because it stress tests the whole philosophy of being a client-centered coach, right? The premise here is that you as a coach can look at an athlete and say, this intrinsic motivator or current self-belief they have is allowing them to be an extremely high-level athlete, but it might be costing them in the long run or costing them happiness now. So I can think of many good examples in many sports. So someone becomes so perfectionist and so consumed with the idea of being at their best that they really do beat themselves up and feel terrible, and they go through true periods of depression when they're not able to perform at their highest. Or in team sports, think of The Last Dance, they put so much pressure on their teammates and make them feel terrible and create an environment that leads to high performance, but is also emotionally challenging and sometimes even abusive, you know? And as a coach, maybe you think, I don't want to touch that. But as a human, you think, oh, I should touch that. And ultimately, the question becomes, how can I help the athlete be fully aware of this? Because often they aren't. Sometimes they are aware and they don't know a different way. And then the conversation is simply asking them if they think they can find another way. Are there other ways for you to reach an extremely high performance without, this kind of caustic fuel that's in your gas tank right now? And, as Amanda Rizzo, our mental health specialist, has said on some podcasts before, like the secret to therapy, if there is one, is that you can't make a realization for your client. You can say literally the exact same thing that they might eventually say to themselves after they have a realization, but it won't have the same punch. It won't have the same impact. They have to internalize that perspective for it to actually become something that impacts them and that changes their lives. So I think the question really is, even if you did accurately identify that this thing or this approach, this mentality they have is harming them as a human, but allowing high performance, could you even change it? Even if you told them and talked to them about it and they recognized it, unless that led to them themselves identifying it and seeing it the same way, ultimately it wouldn't change the way they were doing things. It might just create discord between the two of you. So, I don't want to name any names because I think this person probably should tell their own story, but I was talking to a very high-level athlete at Sheffield, and their motivational perspective had changed over time with them getting older and having more life experiences. And they were actively seeking out, how do I find a way to be the best and be my best, but not do it the way I did previously, because it just is not working for anymore mentally now that I've had these life circumstances change. And the conversation, and I asked them, well, what's changed? What was it like before? What's your relationship with those around you who saw it that way, and maybe they're not on the same page with you now? And I also asked them questions like, do you think that there are more than one way mentally to get to high performance? And, they had to wrestle with that question. And I said, well, let me give you some examples, and I pointed out, for example, Evie Corrigan, who, if you listen to her talk about on, say, King of the Lifts, her mentality going into competing, it is different from some of the other athletes. And I think that the diversity of perspectives is very important. I mean, we've got some great examples in powerlifting right now of people who came up in like Texas and Florida, like football, right? So this is like, win at all costs, kill the enemy, this is Sparta, highly competitive environment. And not necessarily an unhealthy way, like let's keep it to sports, but, talking shit, seeing it as a zero-sum game, I have to beat everybody, I have to crush my enemies. These are all things that have been repeated as of late in some of those circles. And it's a very American team sport, even regional perspective. And I put the smile on my face because I did play 1 year of high school football in Northern California, which is actually a random pocket of that same kind of culture. And let's just say it wasn't for me, but I understand it. And I think any highly competitive person can tap into that, but this is like, all the juice and all the cables just connected to that one perspective. And that is very, very different to the way, Evie saw it as this kind of internal thing, like, hey, I'm going to be my best. I want to enjoy training. I'm focused on progress, and I'm going to put together my best personal potential. I'm going to be my best. And if that results in me being the best, great. That's, a cherry on top. Rather than I want to be the best, and that's actually still intrinsic motivation. I want to be the best, and that's an intrinsic core thing that I'm focused on, and I need to beat everybody else to do that. We're coming to eat the same cake, and I'm going to take that food off your plate, right? Both of those things or mentalities can result in extremely high performance. So just me simply pointing out in this conversation with this athlete, that there are more than one road to Rome is planting a seed, and then, you listen, see how they respond to that. And the question is, do they think that's a viable option for them? And even if it's not, do they think that's a viable option for them ever or yet? Or is that a possibility? Are they willing to explore it? And are they willing to look inwardly and try to view themselves, competition, and their motivation differently, and actively take a front seat role in constructing a new motivational mindset and perspective? And by asking questions, by reflecting, by providing your perspective, which is by definition is different than theirs, you're seeing things that they don't because you're outside of their head, you can help an athlete facilitate that process. And I think that is an example of how I would approach that, and how I have approached that as a coach. Just providing that alternative perspective, but listening and still asking questions. Because if I just say what makes sense to me, that doesn't necessarily change anybody's mind, because of course I can see it that way. It exists in my head. I've already created, the logical argument, and I've had the experiences, and I have the personality that allows me to view it that way. But the pathway for someone else who has never viewed it that way is going to necessarily look different. So I have to collaborate with them. I have to ask questions. I have to make it not about me, but about them, and figure out how can they find the opportunity to see this differently if they want to.
Eric, so funny, because literally the person that you're referring to that if eventually, when we released the video, was one of the examples I was thinking of when I thought of that question. I think there should be a short story that essentially is about a coach who helps make people whole again. They lose like that pathway to being a champion, but they're better as people as a result. I was going to say, so now pulling back a little bit, when you talk about, and you said what Amanda Rizzo said about how they have to reach their own epiphany, like you can lead them to the water, but it's up to them to realize actually what's going on. And I like what you said, where, it's not all about you, like as a coach, and the idea, well, it's a relationship, it's a dynamic, it's like you're there to facilitate their success. And I want to get into what that entails. But I think when you said it's the philosophical underpinnings of the whole coaching client experience, where you're there in service of them, really kind of frames things exactly the way that it should be. And that's what we joked before, but like, we did it or whatever, like the person, or like, man, I've seen it in so many different sporting events. Sometimes we're the coach, and I could think of some MMA examples, Eric, where like the coach is kind of not that they're stealing the thunder of said client or said athlete, but they're making it seem that all the athletes are, they're a dime a dozen, and it's really their rarefied coaching that helps elevate them to the next level. So can you talk to us then about how can a coach in general help facilitate then the success that they are after? Let's say that a client is, they're desiring X outcome. How does a coach facilitate that then?
Absolutely great question. So this is described in the literature as athlete-centered coaching, person-centered coaching, client-centered coaching. And I think it all falls under the umbrella of autonomy support, which goes right back to self-determination theory. And it's the idea that a coach can play the role of supporting someone's autonomy rather than doing what you were describing in claiming like authority, like an authoritarian coach who claims ownership of their client's success. Like, Team Easy Shreds got 24 pro card wins this year, and 2 world titles and 1 American title, DM for coaching kind of thing. Or you're actually like you're claiming that you won these titles, not your athletes, right? Or your team did. So it's, and we'll get into the how does marketing interplay with this later in this podcast, and how I think they can interplay in a positive way while still and actually more effectively getting you the clients you probably do want to work with, or getting clients who have the right perspective. But we'll come back to that. But the way an athlete or the way a coach does this is they put themselves in a position to provide autonomy support. So you're looking at relatedness, competence, and autonomy as things that you can enhance, and autonomy being the primary thing. So how can I facilitate an athlete feeling like they have control over their own athletic journey? And there are various in-depth schools of coaching that essentially fall under that. And we have data to suggest that just like SDT is generally related to success and exercise behavior, Sporting success is related to autonomy, support, and coaching. So there's a great, relatively recent meta-analysis that came out in 2021 titled Autonomy, Support, in Sport and Exercise Settings, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis by Mosman and colleagues. And broadly, what they found was that autonomy support was correlated with a wide range of positive outcomes, including, athletes reporting basically a feeling of fulfillment of their psychological needs, having intrinsic motivation, which we know predicts success, general well-being, and also actual better performance and higher self-esteem. So higher achievement, feeling like they can put forth better effort, and also feeling that they have a better relationship with their coach. So again, this is correlatory data. It's very difficult to prove causation. Like, you can't be like, oh, the reason why you squatted more is because your coach supported your autonomy, right? That's not the way it works. There's also a program. There's also your genetics. There's also what you ate that day. But it certainly is in the mix somewhere where athletes with coaches who support their autonomy seem to achieve better, feel like they have a better relationship with their coach, have a better relationship with their sport, enjoy the process more, and ultimately feel like their needs are being met, which is, that should be the measure of success by any coach, in my opinion. Now, what this actually looks like, so this is kind of me saying like, yo, meta-analysis, trump card for the evidence-based community. This is a thing, but I didn't really tell anyone what to do. And I think we need to look a little deeper into other models to better understand where we have points where we can intervene, where we can help our athletes do things, where we can facilitate success, and what we should look for, what we can assess to therefore actually do something. And another closely related model, and I do want to give a shout out to the other Eric, Dr. Trexler. He and I have been writing or doing videos on this in mass for a couple of years now, and he is really he took, the baton and really ran with it. And he's done a number of great reviews in mass over the last volume specifically. I also talked about it on the Stronger by Science podcast, where some of these models are discussed in detail. And one of them is what's called the COM-B model. And that is capability, opportunity, and motivation, and then -B for behavior. And that is a empirically supported model. So when we look at it, it is actually related to and explains changes in behavior, and exercise behavior specifically, and nutrition behavior and wellness. And basically what it is capability, motivation, and opportunity together predict and influence behavior. So this goes really well with STT, right? So capability, motivation, opportunity. Motivation is the outcome of self-determination theory, right? Capability is basically a shared concept with competence. And opportunity is just saying that, yeah, you can have all the motivation in the world, but if you don't have the resources, you're not in the position to do something, it ain't going to happen. Like, just think about wanting to do a tech startup in Uganda versus San Francisco. It's going to be a different set of opportunities that are available to you. Or, you want to become an excellent football player, and you're in a private school with a strength conditioning coach and $1 million training facility, or you're in an inner city school that actually has to borrow a field with another school to actually play, right? So those are the types of things I'm talking about. Exactly. Bootstraps, pull them up, all the way to the moon. Got to get it, right? But this is a cool checklist, because when things are not going well, when the behavior change that you're trying to help an athlete achieve is not happening, you can go through the checklist, right? You can go, all right, have I not mentored them to the degree, or are they not ready for the challenge they're taking on? Is the capability not quite there yet? That's an opportunity to assess. All right, do they seem motivated to actually do this? Potentially yes or no. They're grinding through it. They're making themselves do it. Okay, we need to go back and check, what are your goals? Is your intrinsic motivation aligned up with what we said we wanted to do? It's been 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, and maybe things have changed for you, or maybe some element of self-determination theory is not being fully accessed to lead to that motivation. And then finally, is the opportunity lacking? Like, let's talk about your work schedule. Let's talk about your family obligations. Let's talk about all the other commitments in your life, or things. Or like your exercise availability? Like, oh, you can only go to this gym once per week, yet I've programmed you to train with that specific exercise 3 times a week, and now you're driving 2 hours to go, out of your way from work, or whatever. You can think of a million different things, and that's basically what you assess. The COM-B model, I think, is really useful that way. If the behavior change is not occurring, you have a conversation with your athlete, and you can kind of go through these things as a checklist. Is the capability there? Is the motivation there? If not, go back to SDT. It's a nice little flow chart. Is the opportunity there? Okay, what are the barriers, logistical, to your success? And can I provide any advice, or can we modify the plan so that it works within what those logistical barriers or opportunities are? So I think that is a really useful model. And for anyone who wants to read more about this, there's a great study titled Capability, Opportunity, and Motivation in a Cross-Context Empirical Examination of the COM-B Model. And that is by Wilmot and colleagues, and it came out also in 2021. So this is not just like theoretical constructs. These have also been empirically validated. And I think these are all useful ways of kind of viewing these constructs. It's not just, oh, here's the way a coach is supposed to be. What do I do with that? But, here's the actual points of intervention. And then I think when I say points of intervention, it's really important to remember that if we're an athlete-centered coach, if we're a client-centered coach, intervention often starts with asking questions, prompting a conversation, and an understanding that it is the athlete who's fully aware of their situation, maybe not aware of your perspective, but you're looking to get the permission from the person to start that conversation, to share your perspective, to then collaborate to help that athlete do what they want to do, which is a kind of a mindset shift sometimes to the typical perspective of, oh, you've hired me, I see a problem, let me tell you what the solution is out the gate. Because oftentimes that will miss some of the more rich context that person might understand if they were to frame it, or if you gathered information first before giving the solution. Or sometimes, and you're in a Reverend Iconoclast, you get this, even if someone is telling you something that you would tell yourself, the fact that they prompted it and not just asked you like, hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? Do you want to approach that, or do you want to take an angle on that? You have this initial resistance, the one thing I hate is when I'm going to go do the dishes, and while I'm on the way over there, my wife asks me, hey, could you do the dishes? Because I'm like, I was going to do it anyway,
Now I'm never doing that.
Yeah, but it's like, it makes you feel, it's like a subversion of your autonomy, which goes right back to SDT. So you can get more juice even out of the same concept, idea, strategy when it is driven by the athlete. And that's something to constantly remind yourself of. And I think initially some coaches are resistant to this idea because it feels like they're losing their ability to do their job. But listen, you can always start a conversation and ask a question. It's not like you just have to wait around. And I think that is sometimes a misconception.
Eric, I thought you were going to joke. You know what one of the things I hate? And I thought you were going to say, man, when I'm just spitting straight fire and there's another ambulance in the background where we used to battle, remember my old place, now that I'm in the basement, but because the windows were open and so on and so forth. Anyways, let's talk about that though. How one sets the standard and to be an athlete-centered coach. Only because you brought up marketing and I referenced something that's inside the Mass article where you joke about yourself, about the anecdotal, like how one would frame it, the before and after, and the e-shreds. And I won the River City Royal Rumble Classic 2019. That you almost set the standard, Eric, from the word jump, because it's about the framework then of expectations. If the way that you procure clients is that you position yourself as an authority figure and you're someone that has all the answers, you're almost intentionally robbing, it seems, the client of any modicum of agency because you're establishing that you have all the answers, they don't have all the answers. And it's almost that not that people become addicted to that concept of being in a position of authority and control. It's in a place, and as a consequence, the person doesn't have any self-realization in terms of potential epiphanies or what they're doing or why they're doing or personal growth or anything that can actually lead to them being a better athlete. But it's more about, hey, I know what I'm talking about. This is what you got to do. One of the best examples you gave it, I forget honestly what episode in a podcast, is when a client asked you, and this is a great example, I would say a guru versus a coach. I honestly forget what the question was, but it wasn't a like nonsensical or arbitrary question that someone asked you. I'm making this up. It wasn't like worlds or something, but they asked you a question. You said, "I'm not sure," but it was something that was meaningful. Someone that presents or pretends to have all the answers, that would never be the case. And so the whole concept of setting the standard so you can facilitate the success kind of seems like it starts maybe, Eric, from the word jump in terms of how you procure and market, as how you procure clients and then how you market yourself. And that also will then hinge upon how the client expects or has expectations from you in terms of the services you provide, what they're going to do, and what that relationship looks like. So what from the word jump, what does that then look like? Once you've made the choice, you're like, Eric, you know what? I'm gonna take down my before and after photo. Maybe it's not just about me. Like, how do you set this tone of what you've been talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that people have thought about in the academic sector as well. So, with the idea of, hey, we've identified that autonomy supportive coaching, athlete, person, or client centered coaching is a thing, and that it is, and it seems to be based on that meta analysis aligned with better outcomes, better relationships, and potentially even better performance. We should find out what the characteristics of these athlete-centered coaches are. And there's a great study that also Trexler reviewed not too long ago, Characteristics of a Person-Centered Coaching Approach by Garner and colleagues. Now, this isn't like a super quantitative empirical assessment, but what they did was they took already well-identified sports coaches who were viewed by their colleagues and who had gone through the type of training to be person-centered coaches. And then they put a camera on them and they watched their interactions with their athletes over a given period of time, and they looked for themes that were consistent across those coaches. So these are high-level sports coaches who were seen and respected as person-centered coaches, and they had certain certain character traits that were common across all of them. And I think this is very useful because you can kind of check your own perspective as a coach, or for clients who are out there searching the gram for coaches, you can see if the way they present themselves lines up with these. And they called it the POWA model of humility, POWA. That's what we do as academics. We try to make silly acronyms, and we always do. And notice it's the model of humility. So humility was kind of like a consistent theme throughout the whole thing. And that goes right back to your question of why I was comfortable saying why. And it's because I tried my best to take a perspective of there's always something to learn here. And even when I know my stuff on protein or autoregulation or whatever, there is something to be learned for the individual perspective. And that's so for coaching, there's always something to be learned because you're dealing with a unique human with every single athlete, right? So the 4 qualities in POWA, of course, POWA, is perspective, the ability to step back and see the bigger picture and try to see things objectively. So not getting too wrapped up. And this is really useful because you can provide a perspective when you talk to your athletes that is useful for them, that's outside of their head, and having an objective eye, we've talked about this many times, is a critical component to having a coach, right? The O is other-centered focus, meaning that you make decisions that are intended to benefit the athlete or others as opposed to yourself. So, for example, an athlete comes to you and they're talking about how staying in their weight class is starting to develop an unhealthy relationship with food. They're really, really body focused. They're not enjoying the sport. They're getting hurt too often. But if they go up a weight class, they're not going to have a chance to win a title. So you talk them into staying in the weight class so they can win worlds again and pad your resume. That would not be an other-centered, coaching decision, right? The way you approach that is you just listen, you respond to them. They'll probably bring up, I guarantee there's no athlete out there who's winning a world title or is at the top of the podium who is not thinking about the fact that they might not be as competitive. And that's the push and pull they're getting to. The other centered focus would be to help them actually identify their values, what matters the most to them, the decisions they want to make. And they can decide, okay, do I want to sacrifice those things for another shot at the world title, or is it no longer worth it to me? And then whichever way they go, you support, rather than trying to funnel them down the way that benefits you, right? Willingness to learn is what the W is, and that kind of goes right back to the whole concept of humility. So being open, expressing vulnerability, which can be seen as not knowing the answer to something, and being able to receive feedback, but also seeking feedback. So someone who isn't just open to it, but actively is seen to be doing things like, this person knows more about X, Y, and Z than me. I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to try to learn from them. This is something I can improve, right? So those things are very important in addition to acknowledging mistakes. And this is probably the most common thing you will see contrasted by the kind of authoritarian coach who has all the answers, is above reproach and seems perfect, right? Or at least tries to present themselves in that light. And, we see that in politics, the never admit fault, calling it flip-flopping when someone changes their mind or whatever. This is something that actively conflicts with some of the societal messaging of what we see as an expert, which is actually wholly separate to expertise. It's braggadociousness or this, false confidence, right? And it's actually being closed-minded. And it means that no matter how much of an expert you are right now, we know you're stuck there, unfortunately, because you're not open to learning. And then finally, the A, that's accurate self-assessment. And that's being able to take as honest as possible appraisal of yourself and know what your strengths and weaknesses are. Because when you combine that with these other factors, that means that you're going to leverage your strengths and you're going to seek out other people or the resources, the tools to shore up your weaknesses so that you can be a better resource to your athlete, right? Now, like you said, from the word jump, this can impact how you operate in the coaching space, in the strength community or the fitness community or the bodybuilding community, what have you. And I think, like I said, if you're a client trolling the gram looking for a potential coach, one of the most common things you'll see are like before and after transformations, right? The coach will do basically a post on one of their clients. And these can take many, many different forms, but often, you even see it in powerlifting, the before and afters. Like they show a meet of the person 3 years ago and they total X, and they have a video of them totaling, 500 pounds more than that or something like that. And then they talk about how they work with the athlete. Now, I do believe there's nothing wrong with before and afters, but before and afters can be done in two very different ways. Like we talked about earlier, if it's like, before and after, and the language is all about how, using my system, this person won. And this was just one of 30 wins that our team or I coached my athletes to succeed at. Like that simple language there. I coached my athlete to success. Not my athlete won, and it was a privilege to be in their corner, right? Those two, like there's subtle distinctions, and sometimes it's certainly not even intentional. Yeah. And it's not a false statement to say I coached my athlete to success, but it takes ownership of it to a degree that is indicative of not being athlete-centered, right? So, or even just kind of rewarding the behaviors of creating a hierarchy. Like, this client was an awesome athlete because they put their head down and followed the plan to a T. Like that's great, and maybe that is what happened, or maybe it was even what needed to happen. But that's different from saying, I collaborated with my athlete, we worked together, we developed a plan that was customized to them, and they kicked ass and executed it, and they were rewarded because of it, or something like that, And these are subtle differences, but they're important differences. Because when you take ownership of the success that your athlete has, it's an effective marketing strategy. And I don't think anyone would deny that. But I don't think it's ineffective to just phrase it the way I was suggesting. And even if it is less effective, you have to think about, is it worth it to get a few more athlete inquiries and fill up my roster with that messaging? And the first thing you might think is, well, bottom line, yes. And then I can be a good athlete-centered coach once they're on my roster. But here's the thing, is that if you hook someone with thinking that you're a wizard and that you have all the keys and all they need to do is follow your plan, that they don't have a role in the coaching. They don't need to share their experiences. They don't need to collaborate. You got the keys, a win's guaranteed. I just need to, do what you do and you're going to make me win. If that's what you actually have convinced a potential client of, and then you decide you want to be an athlete-centered coach with them, when you start asking them questions, or when you don't have like the magic program within the first 5 minutes of sitting down, it's going to feel like the rug got pulled out from them. Like, hold on, you convinced me you were the magician, and now you're being like, how many days per week can I train? Or what do I like? Or, what did my prior training look like? That shouldn't matter. You have the keys. What do I have to do with this? And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be an uphill battle from the word jump when you have someone coming on who you've convinced that you are this magical guru, and now you're trying to get the information you need from them to be successful, and they're expecting you to already have all the information necessary. So I think any benefit you might get to getting larger numbers is going to be offset by the fact that you are immediately conflicting with the philosophy that you initially presented to what they're experiencing when you first have that initial call.
Look, Eric, it's all about the bottom dollar, okay? And some people would say, hey, I got the Midas touch, okay? Everything I touch turns to gold, so it's a result of myself. Little do they realize that if someone turned completely to gold, let's say their exterior at least, they'd asphyxiate, okay? Because it would cause a wide variety of different issues. And maybe that is a better symbol of what's actually happening when you take that approach. So you explain now from the word jump how one would approach it. So you set the right expectations. And then on the coaching side, when we talk about coaching expectations, because I think, you know, we need to recognize this aspect that I don't know if you would agree with this, but certainly I would say for myself, when I started as a personal trainer, that you have a desire to help people. Like you want to see people
Mhm.
succeed. And then some of that, there might be, as we spoke about in another episode, an overreaching in terms of like, expert creep in terms of the things that you offer, let's say rehabilitation or so on and so forth. But that also in another way, what you expect that you can give to the actual process itself, or what you attribute to yourself, or what you attribute to obviously the client. So can we talk then just about the coach themselves setting the expectations, and then talk about I understand you went on then to talk about performance, EQ, like all the other various aspects, but can you just get into that a little bit then to give people some context?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what does this look like? Sometimes even on game day. I think I can't remember if it was on Iron Culture, but it was definitely on the King of the Lifts. I was joking about how Jess and I we butted heads over the fact that I didn't want her to take the stairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is a moment where I was not being an athlete-centered coach, and ironically, it was the closest thing to a conflict between Jess and I. It was really minor. Like, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but I was reflecting on the moment where I didn't ask questions like, "Oh, do you think that'll affect your performance?" Or, and she would have been like, "No," because I go on a run every day and it's fine. It's only 3 flights of stairs, but this is one of those points where the one deviation that I think I had with her where I wasn't being client centered was the one place where there was conflict, and I like so it's not a perfect like explanatory system that covers every single variables, because if I was to go back, not gonna lie, I would still push back on taking the stairs, just because I just even on the off chance that it could affect your performance, I might have maybe tried to deliver it a little differently. But and like I said, it really was a non-issue. It's just kind of funny, but I think it is. It just highlights that this is, yeah, it's an emotional stance you take. It's a communication style. It's a philosophy, but not every single situation lends itself perfectly to it. And you do have to constantly work at it, reflect, think about it. And the first thing I asked Jess when we had our debrief about the competition when we talked together, I was like, "How do you think I did as far as supporting you on game day?" And we had a conversation based upon that initial question, right? So that's what it looks like a lot of times, is checking in and having those conversations. But I think it really does kind of, its fingers go into a lot of different aspects of performance. So Omar, I know you've seen this. I've seen it, and I've seen really good coaches do it too. So just to be clear, this doesn't dictate how we judge a coach purely based upon this. But the powerlifting coach who gives like maybe 8 cues during like 1 rep of squats, like 3 steps out, big breath, knees out, up, hips, wait for the rack it,
Yeah.
back, like all that stuff. And, some of it is just like we get excited and we yell, but I've actually ran into coaches who legitimately feel that if they don't give these cues to each one of the points of the lift, the performance of the lifter is worse. Now, if we just forget everything about athlete-centered coaching, we just talk about like motor learning, there are some issues here, right? Like expert performance actually comes down to it being not thought about and just done and being ingrained. And that's eventually where we're trying to get to. Not that it can't be refined over time, but then you kind of re-go through that process and you get it back to making it automatic, right? So I don't really think a client or an athlete relying on 10 different cues is good for motor learning. It could be for a phase of motor learning, perhaps, if that cue helps them remember something and then they feel it and they experience it, and then eventually the cue goes away, right? Or it gets internalized and then it eventually goes away. Like, that's a whole other topic. But just think about that. Like, let's say it was true. Let's say that the client actually needed you to yell those cues at them to perform well, and you had to physically be there and they had to hear it. Talk about poor autonomy, right? Like, the client can't perform. Like that is to me, if that was the case, let's say it was true, that would immediately be a point, okay, we need to work on that. I want you to be able to perform in a variety of environments. I want you to be able to have the autonomy and the competence so that if I'm not there saying this, like maybe that worked when we first worked together 3 years ago and you really didn't have good kinesthetic awareness, you didn't have a lot of confidence, and you weren't sure what you're supposed to be doing at each point of this lift, and you asked me and you directed me and we came up with some cues together. It was collaborative. That could have been the outcome of a athlete-centered coaching experience and interaction. But then it would be like, all right, so now that you've got these cues down, what can we do to start making you more autonomous and you feeling competent enough? Like, I want to see you, like, there's two aspects of self-determination theory. You need to be autonomous and able to perform on your own. This is your athletic journey. You don't need to be like beholden to me saying things when you're squatting. Like, you don't want to have to rely on my remembering to say squat or big breath or knees out or whatever at the right time, or hips, which means literally nothing. That's one issue, the autonomy. But then also, like, if you need those cues from going from novice to intermediate to advanced, are you feeling like you're developing that competence? Like, is that motor learning something that's really becoming ingrained? So I think that's one of those things where we wouldn't typically connect those two concepts, like cueing. Typically it's, oh, there's good cues, there's bad cues, like externally focused, internally focused, and when do I say them or whatever, how many? And that is seemingly like an academic discussion. But the underlying philosophy to someone who is giving all the cues in the world and feels like they have to physically be there giving the cue or the athlete will fail, that's an example of something not actually being athlete-centered. And that coach might be athlete-centered in almost every other way. They just had a certain school of teaching or school of thought related to cues and the actual performance on the platform. So I think like I said, there's the fingers of being an athlete-centered coach go into a lot of different domains, and some of them are quite subtle. I think that is a relatively subtle example. Another one might be, I've had this, and I know I haven't responded the way I would have liked to these days, where you have a check-in, right? And the athlete said, I had a rough week, but I stayed on track, and I thought about it, and I just didn't want to disappoint you, right? It seems like a win, right? So the client followed their nutrition plan, or they got in that hard session despite their schedule, and they said, no, you know what? I heard your words on my shoulder, and I didn't want to have to face you and feel like I'd let you down. I think most coaches would be like, good job, great job staying on track. You pushed through it, and I'm honored to hear that I was in your ear, But when you really think about that, the athlete is saying that for whatever reason, I was not motivated to do this, and the only thing that got me in the gym or had me hit my macros or whatever was the fact that I didn't want to let you down, right? So I think the way I would respond to that today is I would still say, hey, you're an awesome athlete. I really enjoy working with you. A way to stay on track and push you through it. But just so you know, if you hadn't stayed on track, I wouldn't have been disappointed because it's not about me. These aren't my goals. They're your goals. And on that note, if you're finding yourself struggling to be motivated to follow your plan and what you had to rely on was this extrinsic motivator, me, let's revisit your goals. Where are you at? Like, what do you think? Well, why couldn't you get the motivation together internally to go to the gym or hit your macros? And then that's an opportunity to learn more about them. Maybe recalibrate the goals, maybe get them to think deeply, and maybe they find they're a slightly different person when they initially set those goals 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And all of a sudden now you can facilitate better performance. Because how many check-ins are they going to have where it was just your voice that was the one thing that got them into the gym or got them to follow their nutrition plan? Eventually that's not going to work. But if they have a very, very strong why that's connected to their identity, their meaning, their values, and who they are and who they want to become, now you don't have to worry about that, shoelace and bubblegum connection to their goal of it just being hopefully their commitment to you and your relationship is the only thing that sustains it. That's a great additional factor. Don't get me wrong. We can stack those chips, but we want to actually make sure that we're stacking chips. It's not just that one chip of, I didn't want to let my coach down. I'd much rather you not want to let yourself down and you have a really strong reason for why you want to do this than just simply pleasing me.
Eric, what I heard from everything you just described is that you, in fact, were the reason for their success, which,
Yes.
lends credibility to what we were saying before, Eric, once again, that the role of the coach can't be understated. I think some people underrate it personally. No,
Hmm.
I do think that that is really interesting. Even that example, like getting more into the weeds, where on the surface, like the client was able to achieve their goal, but the rationale behind the impetus behind why they did that is off. And is that facilitative long term for what they're after? And I think one of the things I've even thought of, like as a side note, is coming back eventually to YouTube and so forth, creating content is like, what is always the utility and function of this? And is this something that actually will add to the person in terms of how they implement it into their training, their nutrition? They'll have a clear, tangible impact, or are we just needlessly complicating things just to either create content? You brought up that example about the blueberry arms, which is very funny, like, about that person where I think the fitness industry in general and the coaching probably is one of the aspects of it. They're fantastic at emphasizing and creating problems that sometimes don't exist. So the idea that you're incomplete, like kind of what a lot of marketing is predicated upon. And to your point, like if you start,
You're broken, but we can fix you.
yeah, and when you start from that point, no matter how successful, let's say the relationship might be, because you might be using potentially negative pathways, fear, insecurity to motivate someone, and they could get great results. Well, then the work that that person needs to do over the subsequent years, if they want to be, kind of made whole, or to your point about, the idea of helping them achieve a higher aspect of themselves, you're really setting them back. And that part that you said too about from a marketing perspective, just the idea that for some people, it's like, is it really worth like your before and after transformation? We got her, I got it. It's like we transformed, setting just that tone where it really, from that very first interaction, it's going to have an entirely different paradigm that they're going to be entering with. So let me actually open this to you, Eric. You gave some concrete examples. You gave some very specific examples then for people. You gave the general overview of where it comes from, self-determination theory, the role of the coach, how the coach actually assists in the client in terms of achieving what they're after. Where do you want to go from here then? Because this is clearly a topic you thought about for a long period of time. What do you think are some other aspects that you like to cover?
Yeah, I think the big one is just that understanding that it is a process to kind of like, especially for people in the evidence-based community, in my opinion, to kind of reshape their perspective on this, because a lot of the time, like I remember when I first started positioning myself as like the science guy, right? I'm the coach who's got a lot of information, and if you value exercise science and nutrition, a big reason why you might want to work with me is because you think I know all the science, like, and that's what you see is
Eric, I saw your blog. You're called the Science Babe, right? Science Babe. That
the
was your
science
thing?
babe. That was my moniker for a while. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is like, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think the perspective that was there for a while, and I'm glad this is changing. And the fact that I'm very comfortable doing an episode like this, and I know it'll be well received, is evidence that it has changed. But I think this episode would have been received differently 10 years ago.
Hmm.
I think there would have been more pushback on it, because we were at a point in the community where there was a lot of quote unquote bro science, and I don't mean that is disparaging or anything like that, but there were practices that were very obviously actively harmful, and there still are. That the fight was against that, and that was being positioned as the bad way of doing things, and therefore the science way was positioned as the good way of doing things, and it became like, oh, okay, everything science related is good, and a good coach is science, and a bad coach is not science, right? And I think understanding that science informs the methods of what we do, but it is not coaching, is a really important distinction. And you can be a really bad coach who has good methods, and you can be a really good coach who has bad methods. So as someone who is like evidence-based, science-based, and who gets hired by people who want to know the science, the common experience, like when you're doing email-based coaching or even in person, is, hey, coach, I have all these questions. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? And they feel like very quantitative, academic, straight-up questions. And like, okay, I don't think you need to have protein before you go to bed that's slow digesting because of X, Y, and Z, as long as you hit your total intake, and yada, yada, yada. And you can rattle off all these correct answers about the science. And that is great. And that the client may really find value in that. They're learning, you're mentoring them, you're teaching them. But at the same time, that is a different kind of stance than the perspective of, I'm not just gonna, you don't coach people in that way though. That is like, that's not coaching. That is question and answer from a client. And that's fine. Like, don't get me wrong, I still answer in that relatively straightforward way. But you also have to put your coaching hat on and think, okay, why are they asking this question? What is the motivating emotion behind this question? Are they curious? Then great. Are they fearful? Do they feel like they need to turn over more stones? Are they worried things aren't working very well? Is this them kind of just working out angst? There's a lot of reasons why it could be happening. And it also opens the door to asking the question of, hey, where are you getting your information from? And how much time are you spending trying to get this information? Are you being really obsessive about things? And what's motivating that? So like, there's a whole aspect that is, not necessarily addressed when you're just viewing it from, the reason why I'm a good coach is because I have all the answers, or I have a lot of answers, or I'm very good at finding answers. And the client is leveraging that. But I think if that's all you are, you're going to get replaced by an algorithm in 10 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, ChatGPT is pretty good at finding out the mostly correct scientific answer if you ask it right now. You know, you get someone in there who actually understands academia and says, hey, I want you to look for, a consensus of at least 2 meta-analyses and find the highest impact factor journals. And I want to see a standardized mean difference calculation and then respond to this question, not just like what's the Google hits or whatever. And all of a sudden you've got people, because that's the whole purpose of science, is to get repeatable results on the same quantitative topic, right? So me being very good at remembering the last 3 meta-analyses, well, what if you don't have to rely on memory? And what if you don't have to have biases, right? So yeah, if all you are is a collection of knowledge and the ability to say the right answer to things scientifically, that is replaceable. But being able to have rapport and a relationship with an athlete that facilitates their ability to better understand their own motivation and to therefore push hard when needed and push harder than other people and actually succeed to the greatest of their capability, I think that's a lot harder to replace. And that is the actual role of a coach. And yeah, you can be a coach who also knows a bunch of science, and I think that's beneficial. Don't get me wrong, but it's not your job, right? Your job is to stay up to date with the latest things and have good methods, but the actual like role of the coach is not that. That is baked into it. It's built into it. But I think the first step is understanding what your role is as a coach, and that is not, having the most up-to-date science. That is helping people do hard things.
That is counting to 10. Like
Exactly.
people always forget that aspect. No, Eric, let me just say this final part here. Reminding Skynet how we will not let them take over, I think is the most no, but I think because I think it has increased resonance coming from someone such as yourself, where I joked about like Science Babe, or like being seen as one of the figures, one of the pillars in the evidence-based community, to hear it, because I think also, to frame it maybe another way, I think those are clear and tangible aspects that someone could work on themselves, right? So becoming more science aware, right, of science literate in terms of interpreting some of this stuff or how to apply it to your clients. Like, there are clear pathways that have been established in this community over the last decade. Hey, they can sign up to mass, right? Like, it's so many different things that some of those skills that, not that they're more complex, but they require feedback and they require actually interacting with the human and in a dynamic system where you don't know what's going to happen every single time. And it's not this like repeatable, you have the model that you said, the philosophical underpinnings of being, athlete focused, but upon interacting with each and every person, you'll get a different outcome. And so it's a thing that one must actually participate in and actively work on. That I think maybe, and I do, like, this is my own bias from training people in person, but it taught me a hell of a lot just about like human nature, humans in general, like uh, a wide variety of different things. I think because you can position some of those other things, and because I'm like, we're joking when we say this, like, science is cool, or giving the best possible result was like, well, this is delayed. Like, what science says about ABC, like that is a way. That's a marketing tool. Saying like, hey, I'm gonna make sure you're seen, heard, respected. Your goals are understood. You're always centered. Like, they sound good, and that would sound good in some sort of marketing pitch. But I don't know if right now in contemporary 2023, it's like if you read a coach that emphasized those aspects, and you're just looking at like if someone said, "I'll give you the best results," it's like the cutting edge, like science, this and that, and that's their angle. Let's say you have to silo someone, and then you're talking about some of these like soft people skills, and you're putting that forth and like what you want to do and like helping them like reach their goals. Um, Without framing it that way, like what would someone pick? I don't know. So I think, man, I appreciate you and shout out to the other Eric.
Can I push back about that on that just a little bit? I actually do think you can engage in some of the effective marketing strategies and still,
like, how would you do it, Eric? Like, can you give me an example?
So I think an important thing is that if you coach long enough and well enough, you will have some champions under your belt. And
let the champions do the talking.
Well, no, I mean, absolutely. Like, so if your athlete is willing to say, like, you know, my coach is awesome,
yeah,
and they're a champion, then that's going to do way more than anything you could say about them. But, you know, asking your athlete, hey, I wanted to make a post about our coaching. Would you be comfortable? And I understand, and please, I want you to say no. If I used you as an example. So first, getting consent, I think, is really important. And then I think you could absolutely have the before and after, or the example of, you know, this person just won a world title, and then just have the caption be the right language. And the most important thing in that post is the fact that it's a winner. You know, it's someone who's succeeded at a very high level.
Yeah.
If someone sees that but you don't claim ownership over their win, they're not going to be like, oh, well, I don't know what the coach did, you know?
Yeah.
But if you had like, hey, this athlete just won the world title and it was a privilege to be in their corner. You know, they had a goal. They sought me out to collaborate on it. And, you know, I helped them develop a plan to succeed. And through his, you know, hard work and consistency, he won that world title. I've learned a lot from our partnership, and I'm looking forward to supporting them in the future. You know, DM me for inquiries. How can I help you achieve your goals? Right? Like, that whole thing is, like, I don't think anyone's going to be like, whack ass coach. Like, I don't even know how that person won. Like, you know, and they would not be surprised when they sat down with you for the first call and you started asking them questions. I mean, you asked them questions before they were even your athlete. You know, how can I help you achieve your goals? Right? So if that stance is held in the caption and in all of your marketing material, and you happen to be showing really impressive results, and you have high-level athletes and really, you know, people doing amazing things, I think the fact that you're highlighting really high-level athletes and people doing amazing things speaks a lot louder than your ego trying to take credit for those accomplishments.
Eric, let me be clear here. Your whole marketing plan is to coach world champion powerlifters and then utilize them for your testimonials indirectly in order to accrue more clients. What type of field of dreams bullshit is this? No, I just
you got it.
There's like step one, guys. Everyone listen. Hey,
Step one: snag a big fish. Step two:
trade world
virtue signal online. Step 3: get the money and also still feel good about yourself.
No, but Eric, the thing for real, one of the things that you said is that I much rather have someone say these things in their own voice, which is why even way back I
100%.
identified this. I like the idea of video testimonials, not the one where you stick at the camera like, hey, tell them why I'm awesome, but like just where it's like an interview or themselves just talking about, because then you can get that 3D response of what it felt like, and they would highlight aspects that you wouldn't even think of, as opposed to your point. Like I do think 100% you could leverage your experience with clients, and most importantly, as you just said, for them to tell their own story, which is more impactful than like the before and after, where you're just using like you're using their physique and their transformation to encapsulate everything about your coaching, as opposed to like you have, let's say, a testimonial, like just a video portion of who, like a judge just saying like, yeah, like A, B, C, D, E, and then that also would be a better kind of a way to highlight what your coaching is about. 100%.
Well said. I totally agree.
Eric's like, step one, get them champions. It's like,
big fish. And throw out them lines, poach the clients, get what you need, you know.
Oh, man. It is funny like that, man, people that zero-sum attitude. I could go on a tangent, so I will end it here because I think this has been a very focused episode. I think it's clearly one that you've thought about and you have the experience over, as you said, over 15 years, like damn near. approaching actually 20 years of like in-person training and so on and so forth. The floor is yours, Eric. Is there anything else you want to say kind of before we wrap it up? I think you did a stellar job. People should be checking out Mass already. Monthly application strength sports. Kai already has. Now he has 4 timestamps of Mass, just like top, middle again. Now at the end, final CTA, final call to action.
Yeah, Kai, for the record, do not do that. We just need one link to Mass. So yeah, because Kai's the man. He would actually message me like, "Hey, do you think Omar was serious? Do we need to have all those 4 spots?"
I want to be Kai, man. But yeah,
you will if you ever come out here to New Zealand. Absolutely.
To Auckland. Well, hey, the champion Izzy, my favorite current MMA fighter, just had this stunning victory. All the more reason. Eric's like, so you mean to tell me, Omar?
That's what brought you out. I'd be offended both and happy. That'd be good.
But yeah, anything that you kind of want to wrap up or circle back to?
No, I think we covered it all, man.
Awesome. So I will wrap up this episode and say thank you so much for everyone for listening to another episode of The Iron Culture. We know we missed that one, which we did. It's so fun. Like I think we shouldn't do this now. We should do it at the start, maybe with the next episode. Just about, yes, we missed a week. We're back now. Every single insert date here. From now until the end of time, you go ahead and leave that rating and review on iTunes. I didn't want to read one of the reviews because, again, we want to get right to the topic, but we appreciate everyone listening. We appreciate all the 5 stars or other reviews if they're not 5 stars, but typically people leave those 5 stars, and we'll catch you in that next episode from now until the end of time.